Welcome to part 2. Now,
You must be talking about that silly little genre, the West. Kid stuff, really. I know all about that. Cowboys and Indians galloping across the plains on their horses with their little six-shooters and evil villains. Ha!
I think you're generalizing just a little bit.
No. Pure tripe.
I don't think I like you. You seem kind of uppity.
It's what I do.
Get off my set, you weirdo. Now moving on.
The Western was perceived to be something that was not capable of carrying a serious theme or the depth of more dramatic works. Epic films had been made before 1939. William S. Hart, as mentioned earlier, had made strong, realistic films, but his last film was made in 1924. The Big Trail, made in 1930, was attempted a grand piece involving the West. However, the movie suffers from some hackneyed plot devices and seems somewhat ponderous and slow as the wagon train pushes across very scenic locations. The biggest accomplishment of this film was the introduction of its star. John Wayne really made his name in Raoul Walsh's big film. Wayne would fall into the reliable work of B-westerns, like many other actors, throughout the next decade. In 1939, John Ford made one of the most dramatic, genre-shifting westerns of all time. Rising production costs were starting to kill the B-western, and would have them completely finished off by the early 1950s. Ford, somewhat inadvertently, fixed this problem. Ford had started his career off in westerns, but hadn't made one since 1924, before sound had even been incorporated in film. Since that time, Ford had managed to capture an Oscar for Best Director, which was the first of his 4, and in 1939, at the pinnacle of his career, he released Stagecoach, which tells the story of a diverse group of strangers on a stage under siege by Indians. John Wayne got a big boost in his career playing the Ringo Kid, an ex-con going to take revenge for the death of his father and brother. The movie was a huge hit. It used the very familiar Monument Valley that had become the trademark of Ford's westerns, and an area that many people associate with westerns thanks to the abilities of Ford. The movie's importance cannot be underestimated in giving the genre a huge shot in the arm and jump-starting the career of one of the most preeminent western stars, John Wayne.
John Ford and John Wayne are so closely tied to the Western that they just cannot be ignored. Disassociating them would be almost impossible.
Howdy, Pilgrim.
Who are you?
Well, I'm John Wayne.
You don't look like John Wayne. You sound like John Wayne. John Wayne was much taller than you are. I mean, I'm only 6 foot and he was 6'4". How do you explain this?
This is the best you get on your budget.
I don't think John Ford had to deal with any of this.
Other westerns that have fallen into the classic category, and those who tried to imitate the success of Stagecoach, were hot on its heels. One early attempt at a socially significant western was the Oxbow Incident from 1943. The movie starred Academy Award winner Henry Fonda, and told the story about a lynch mob and their overzealousness to hang someone for a crime against a local rancher. Fonda fights the group in their madness, but he fails. Honestly, this movie has its place in Western history, but it hasn't aged well. By today's standards, it is less of a morality play and more of a stilted film, wagging its finger at the audience with a somewhat hackneyed lesson. Better films from the late 1940s and the early 1950s include John Ford's My Darling Clementine, a retelling of the shootout at the OK Corral, and The Wagon Master, which just added to Ford's legacy. One film, Broken Arrow, from 1950, stands out as a very different movie from those released during the period. Ford was the master and often took the attitude that the only good Indian is a dead one, but Broken Arrow took a very sympathetic stance towards the plight of the Apaches. Most of the Apaches were shown as people who merely wanted peace but felt threatened. James Stewart, who did many good westerns, including Winchester 73 and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, stars as the white man who works as a go-between between the Apache leader Cochise and the United States Army. The movie comes to a head when Stewart's wife is killed in a battle with whites attempting to break the peace. The movie is strong and has aged much better than the previously mentioned Oxbow. Another film from this era worth mentioning is 1953's Shane. The movie tells the story of a lonely gunfighter who comes to a town in turmoil between a greedy cattle rancher and settlers trying to eke out a living on small homesteads. Alan Ladd turns in a great performance as Shane. The movie had a huge following and a devoted fan base who loved both the classic novel and the film. Of course, it also sparked controversy. At the end of the film, Shane rides away as the boy he befriended calls his name. Some claim Shane doesn't answer because he is dead, while others say he just doesn't want to look back.
No matter what point of view you take, there are strong arguments on both sides of the fence.
Shane, come back, Shane!
One film from this era that is very important to mention is High Noon. Made in 1952, Gary Cooper stars as a town sheriff who is faced with a gun battle against an outlaw that he sent off to prison. Cooper attempts to recruit help from the townfolk, but they all cower away. Grace Kelly plays Cooper's bride-to-be and doesn't want to see her beau die. The film comes to a huge climax as the outlaw and his men come into town at noon, hence the title, and have a huge gun battle with Cooper, who eventually comes out on top. Outside of the classic nature of the film, Cooper won an Academy Award for his portrayal. The Oscars have traditionally snubbed westerns. Even John Ford, who had 4 Best Director awards, never won an award for a western despite his esteemed reputation. It certainly helped that Cooper already had a good reputation amongst his peers, and had an award for Best Actor on his shelf.
Cooper's performance was so stirring that the Academy Awards couldn't deny him. Hang on. Ha! Mr. Hollywood Snob, what do you think about that? An Academy Award for a man in a big hat.
I suppose an actor of Cooper's preeminence could even bring grandeur to this lowly genre, even with his great classical music. Maybe even another Academy Award.
But his other Academy Award wasn't for a classic Academy Award film, it was for the war picture, Sergeant York.
Well,
Do you even know what you're talking about? Do you even watch movies?
I like that movie with that one guy, doing that one thing in that, one place.
Wow. That's impressive. There's no room for ignorance around here, folks.
The 50s and 60s were one of the highest times for the westerns in all of cinema history. Naturally, nothing compares to the 1930s in sheer volume, since B-westerns could be produced in such great quantities per year. But the quality of this period vastly outweighs the quantity of the previous one. Individual films from outside the era could be considered better or on par with anything from this era, but no other time saw so many classics being produced with so many great actors who seemed destined to don the big hat and fight the bad guys. Careers were made and reinvigorated by the adult westerns of the era. Yes, they were no longer simply kid stuff with big budgets and big stars. Going through each individual film would take much longer than we have in the context of this work, so I will refer you back to the books mentioned in Part 1. They all cover the best of this era very well and can give you an idea of what to watch. I can give you a couple of personal recommendations from the era. The original 310 to Yuma, made in 1957, is quite good. Though much different from the recent remake, it definitely has some very good qualities. Cowboy, putting Jack Lemmon in a western, has a good sense of humor and works very well. The Unforgiven, a big epic by John Huston about racism and Native Americans, is also quite good and something you can settle in and watch. Of course, one of the best from this era, for my personal preference, is The Magnificent Seven. The film has a lot of star power and a script based on another great movie, The Seven Samurai. The original film, directed and written by the legendary Akira Kurosawa, pitted 7 Ronin against a band of marauders attacking a defenseless town to steal their crops. I highly recommend the original if you don't mind reading subtitles, but if that isn't your cup of tea, The Magnificent Seven is a great substitute. It starred Yul Brynner and Steve McQueen as the head of a band, defending a town from Eli Wallach and his band of bandidos. James Coburn, Charles Bronson, and Robert Vaughn also turned a great performance in support of the 2 stars. The theme song is also as memorable as any in the entire genre. The movie is fun to watch and plays well with the give and take between Brenner and the other characters.
Very few films can boast such a great cast with a great story that just quite frankly add up to a great film. Well, if this is the group that they had to protect the town, I'm sure it would have burned to the ground and everyone killed. Well, hey, who here's as slick as Brenner and fast as McQueen? And did they have this guy tagging along with them? Wait a second, there were no girls in the Magnificent Seven. What good are you gonna do? Oh! 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 Please, folks, stay tuned for part 3. Oh.